My name is Marco Sanchez, and I am the Youth Engagement and Advocacy Coordinator for the United Nations Association of the USA. We are super excited to welcome you all for this session entitled Breaking the Silence on Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity During COVID-19. Moderating this discussion will be our very own London Bell, who is a USA National Council member from the Great Lakes area. Please note that today's session will be recorded, but you all will have the opportunity to ask questions to our fine set of panelists we have today. But without further ado, London, why don't you take it away?
Thank you so much, Marco, and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is London, and as Marco said, I am currently serving as the National Council member for the Great Lakes States, and I am also serving as a national co-chair for UNA Women, and my chosen pronouns are her, hers, she, her, and hers. I am an ally of the LGBTI community. I was raised by my mom, who identifies as a lesbian, and we often together work to advance human rights for the LGBTI community in Detroit and beyond. I participated in UNA USA's National Universal Periodic Review consultation last year in 2019 by hosting an LGBTI consultation on human rights through my UNA Greater Detroit chapter. UNA USA has been preparing for the United States periodic review of its domestic human rights record at the UN Human Rights Council, which will be later this year. And I'm really excited because I've invited the participants from our Detroit consultation to join this session today. So it's no secret that the impacts of COVID-19 are consequential to millions around the world, especially in vulnerable communities. People of color, elderly persons, and the LGBTI community are disproportionately affected by COVID-19. To help us better understand these implications, we have four amazing panelists that will offer their perspectives and give us understanding of their work. With this in mind, I want to pause and have our panelists introduce themselves and briefly give us an overview of their organizations that they are representing. And all of the panelists, when you do introduce yourself, please let us know your chosen pronouns, okay? So if you can all just take 2 minutes to introduce yourselves and the organizations you're representing, that would be wonderful. And Victor, I would like to start with you.
Thank you very much, London, and warm thanks to the United Nations Association Foundation for having me. It's a great honor and a thrill to be here. My name is Victor Madrigal-Borloz. I'm a lawyer from Costa Rica, and I'm currently the United Nations independent expert on protection from violence and discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. This is a mandate which was created by the Human Rights Council of the UN in 2016 as a result of a long process of advocacy by civil society with the idea that a position would be created to report on the manner in which violence and discrimination happens against lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, and gender diverse persons around the world. And the mandate began its work in 2017. I've been the mandate holder since January of 2018. The basis of my work is that I analyze the way in which violence occurs and I bring it to light. I give visibility to how violence and discrimination manifest themselves in the everyday lives of LGBT and gender diverse persons. And then I also collect good practice to advise states on what laws, what public policy, and what administrative actions they can take to actually address this violence. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Victor. Sam, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Sam Brinton. I use the pronouns they, them, and theirs, please. And I serve as Vice President of Advocacy and Government Affairs for the Trevor Project. You may have heard about the Trevor Project. We are the world's largest suicide prevention and crisis intervention program specifically for LGBTQ youth. So we serve hundreds of thousands of LGBTQ youth who call us in crisis or in concern and are there to help save lives. It's a great honor to be part of this conversation. I've always loved conversations with the United Nations, bringing forward the voices of the youth that we're serving. So today I'll be doing my best to try to represent those whom we're serving and also provide some concrete actions we can all take in this crisis as a crisis services organization.
Thank you so much, Sam. Thank you. Chris, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello, everybody. My name is Chris Boian. I am a communications officer and spokesperson with the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR. My personal pronouns are he, him, his. And I would like to thank you, London, Marco, the UN Association and UN Foundation for organizing this discussion and for inviting our organization to be part of it. It's very important and very central to the work that we do around the world. As you probably know, the UN Refugee Agency was established in the immediate aftermath, really, of World War II. And our mandate essentially is to lead and coordinate the international response to refugees and other forcibly uprooted, forcibly displaced people around the world. So our organization has been working for about 70 years now. We currently operate in close to 130 countries around the world where people are being forcibly uprooted from their homes to escape war, conflict, persecution. And we work day in, day out around the world with very vulnerable people. So I'm grateful for you for organizing this conversation, and I look forward to discussing these issues with you during this panel.
Thank you very much, Chris. Thank you for all the work you're doing. And Roy.
Hi there, everybody. I'm Roy Hunt. I'm the Senior Vice President of Global Franchise and Strategic Alliances for Gap Inc. I oversee nearly 600 stores around the world, Gap, Banana Republic, and Old Navy. Most people don't realize, but once we leave the US, most of our stores tend to be franchised. So I have the unique opportunity to travel to many countries and meet with many people. We have stores in about 32 countries and with 42 different partners around the world. So it gives me a unique perspective on how people are treated, what happens around the world, how we as a company, Gap Inc., can bring our values to others that may not always have the same values. So I'm thrilled to be here. I appreciate the invitation.
Thank you so much, Roy. And again, thank you to all of our panelists joining today. And I'm going to go on and go into our first question. And my first question is for Victor. Victor, could you tell us how you're using your mandate as the UN independent expert on sexual orientation and gender identity to advance concerns regarding the interconnectivity of COVID-19 and LGBTI rights?
Thank you, London. As you can imagine, the whole human rights machinery came to be on alert since the beginning of the pandemic. And a lot of the work that has been carried out has been listening to communities around the world to understand how the pandemic is impacting them. In the case of the mandate, what I have done is I've launched a process where over the last 4 weeks, I have been holding a series of town hall meetings and attending a series of meetings, including meetings like this one, where I have been keenly listening to communities, trying to understand how it is that they're being impacted on their everyday life in different aspects of those lives, and also, very importantly, trying to understand what are the measures that could be recommended to states in relation to this. We have a dialogue with the community of states through the Human Rights Council. There is a framework that we have identified in relation to how measures need to abide by legal requirements, how they need to be established within a number of parameters. But most importantly, we have been listening to communities, and up until now, I think I have been very keen to learn, because the thing that I think we are all aware is that this is an experience that none of us had lived before. We may have handled emergency, we may have handled urgency, but a pandemic of this nature and the type of measures that have been put together and in place by states is something that has no precedent. So it's been really important to listen to communities around the world about what their concerns are.
Absolutely, absolutely. And my second question to you is, the COVID-19 pandemic has put government and civil society organizations in difficult positions these past few weeks. Response efforts have varied greatly around the world. Can you give us a breakdown on how state and non-state actors are looking at the intersectional consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic and the LGBTI community?
Absolutely, and thank you very much for introducing that concept, because that is essential.
Yes.
LGBT people and gender diverse persons do not face the consequences of COVID-19 coming from a level playing field.
Right.
Reality is, as we know, LGBT people have been marginalized, socially excluded. They are overrepresented in the ranks of the poor. They tend to have worse health outcomes. Just to give you a few examples, where data exists, over 40% of homeless youth identifies as LGBT. We know that outcomes tend to be lower. We know that health outcomes tend to be lower, economic outcomes tend to be lower. So the reality is that these populations are going to be impacted in a devastating way by the measures adopted in relation to COVID-19. Furthermore, we do not suffer experiences of privilege or discrimination just because of one identity. All of us encapsulate, reunite many identities in one body. And the experience of discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity is compounded by factors such as race, level of education, ethnicity, and a number of other factors. And this is the work that we are trying to carry out, understanding how all of those factors are creating disproportionate impact and having these persons come to the pandemic in a situation of disadvantage. I've reached for the moment 3 great areas of concern in relation to this issue. One of them is that around the world, there's a number of governments that appear to be using the quote unquote possibility of COVID-19 to adopt measures of persecution against LGBT communities. I have, for example, already issued a public statement in relation to Hungary, where legislation related to COVID-19 has been used to restrict legal recognition of gender identity of trans persons, or the raid of an LGBT shelter in Uganda, where I have significant concerns that COVID-19 restrictions were utilized as an excuse to raid the LGBT shelter and to put all of the residents in jail already for a month and a half, a measure that to me seems to have no grounding in any reason. The second area where I'm worried is measures that have been adopted without necessarily consulting the communities about the impact that was going to fall from the measures. I can give you the example of gender-based quarantines in Latin America that reportedly have condemned trans and gender diverse persons to not being able to leave the home because they are exclusively based on the binary of male or female. I also can give you the example of community and police personnel that are being tasked with distributing food, medicines, but in very many communities, as we know, there is significant problems by the LGBT community in trusting religious community or law enforcement officers. So that means that there is no access to those processes of distribution of goods. And finally, one thing that worries me deeply is the redirection of certain health services, particularly related to HIV/AIDS, that have been redirected to COVID-19 because certain services of support of persons living with HIV/AIDS have been labeled as non-essential. And as we know, this can have detrimental consequences on the health of people. Finally, we're monitoring very closely a third area, which is seemingly neutral measures that may have discriminatory impact in the way that they roll out. Particularly, I'm worried about youth and elder LGBT persons that are staying at home with intolerant or unaccepting family members. And I think that There's a number of reports that concern me about increased risk of domestic violence and the mental health of these persons that are staying at home. Or how do you stay at home when you're homeless? How do you actually create social distancing when you don't have the conditions to do that? All of those measures that seemingly neutral will have an impact because of the composition of the communities that we serve. Thank you, London.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Victor. My next question is to Chris. I know that last year, UNHCR launched a series of consultations to identify ways of ensuring that LGBTI refugees are better protected against harm. How is UNHCR continuing this work, especially since migrants and refugees are so vulnerable to infectious diseases like COVID-19?
Yes, thank you, London. Your question highlights a very important aspect of the circumstances that LGBTI persons of concern, people forcibly uprooted from their homes, face. I think as a starter, it's important to recognize that forcibly displaced LGBTI people around the world have faced very unique and very acute vulnerabilities for some time, for as long as our organization has been in existence, and of course for longer. And so what we're looking at now with the COVID-19 public health emergency and the attendant restrictions that are being applied in many countries around the world in connection with the public health emergency is something that is both exacerbating and really shining a light on those unique vulnerabilities that specifically LGBTI forcibly displaced people face around the world. So our organization has continued to work where most of my colleagues around the world remain in the field, where they are working every day to deliver the kinds of responses that all people need who have been forcibly uprooted from their homes, but that specific communities as well, including LGBTI persons of concern who have been forced to flee their homes, need. So as you mentioned, yes, UNHCR launched in the last quarter of last year, began a series of pretty intensive global consultations focusing specifically on LGBTI people who have been uprooted from their homes and forced to flee to escape violence and persecution. And those consultations began in the Asia Pacific region. They were conducted through our field offices and with our staff who are working very closely with uprooted LGBTI people, as well as with LGBTI networks, support networks, other humanitarian actors, NGOs, and other UN agencies, the International Organization for Migration, for example, and the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. So those consultations were launched last year in the Asia Pacific region. They continued in the Middle East and North Africa. They've been held in West Africa. And UNHCR has also recruited a special consultant now to keep the ball rolling, to do some rapid stock taking of where we are in the process, and to keep the process going of bringing all the interested and immediately involved actors in this situation together with a view to an international roundtable discussion on specifically protection of LGBTI people and forcibly uprooted people in the world. Now, that roundtable discussion had originally been scheduled to take place last month, but because of the circumstance, it has been postponed. I think it's scheduled for September now. But all of the findings that will be brought together and analyzed and synthesized from the consultations that have been taking place now since last year on this issue will be brought together at the roundtable discussion, and that will take place over 2 days, I believe, in Geneva. And it will involve, of course, LGBTI people who have experienced forced displacement themselves. It will involve LGBTI support networks and other humanitarian actors, stakeholders. It will involve other UN agencies, philanthropists, advocates, corporate actors. And we're really making a push now to shine a light on the specific and unique vulnerabilities that LGBTI people uprooted from their homes around the world face. So that roundtable is scheduled for later this year now. It's been pushed back a little bit. And the purpose of that global discussion that we will be having is to, first of all, take stock of progress that has been made since 2010, and to identify now specific concrete challenges and obstacles that LGBTI people uprooted from their homes face in real time around the world and in the context of the COVID-19 public health emergency, to really factor that in to the responses and the solutions that UNHCR and partners are able to deliver. We will be sharing with all participants as well best practices on protections and solutions, and with a multi-stakeholder constituency that will be there. It's important that UNHCR and all partners involved in this work together in a coordinated fashion to be able to deliver the kinds of practical and immediate responses that we are being told by LGBTI people around the world they need. And lastly, it will be to identify priority action areas for UNHCR and for other stakeholders, and next steps that will be followed immediately in the months following the roundtable discussion and years to come. Because this is a problem, as I mentioned at the start, the unique and tragic vulnerabilities that LGBTI people who are forced to flee their homes face is not a new phenomenon. No. What is happening now, though, are the COVID-19 pandemic and the responses of states around the world to that are really surfacing aspects of the disproportionate vulnerabilities that LGBTI people face in fleeing the dangers that they face. So we are working hard. Those consultations are continuing and will be on the table. The findings from everything that we've put together in those consultations will be on the table in the roundtable discussions that will happen next autumn.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you. Now my next question is for Roy from the GAP. Roy, as a partner of the UN Foundation, we know that GAP is a strong ally of the LGBTI community and a proud supporter of the UN's work, including the UN Free and Equal campaign. Can you give our audience an understanding of the work that GAP has done to support the rights of LGBTI persons during the COVID-19 pandemic?
Yeah, for sure. You know, quite honestly, being an individual that is a gay man that came out quite late in life, I came out when I was 35 with 2 children, it became really important to me to become part of a company that reflects the values and demonstrates what equality should look like. And I feel fortunate that the GAP has done that based on the things that you just said. You know, over the last many years, actually the last 15 years as an example, GAP Inc. has received 100% rating on the HRC Corporate Index, Equality Index. So I think it's a reflection of how we believe that everybody should be treated equal. We certainly support everybody's rights. One other thing that we've recently done is we published that we pay equally and things like that, which is very unusual in today's world. It's getting better and better. But, you know, it gives us a platform to make sure that we're doing what's right for not only the people that work for us, but the people that shop with us. So as I mentioned, you know, me being the head of our franchise organization and having the opportunity to work around the world, it also gives me an opportunity to make sure that our values and our code of business conduct is also being withheld around the world. We've got all these partners in different areas of the world. And quite frankly, you know, I can see firsthand, unfortunately, how some people aren't treated fairly or are discriminated against. And one thing that we're able to do is hold people that work with us accountable to ensuring that our values and standards are upheld. And, you know, quite frankly, if people don't do that, we will end our relationship with them because we feel so strongly about it. And I think that's an important stand to take. And we've done that consistently. So, you know, we're not a perfect company by any stretch. I don't think any company is, but I do think that we realize where our values lie and what is important to the LGBTQI community. I just think that one thing that I've also had the opportunity to do is be the sponsor of our GAP resource group. And to be able to take, especially in a time like today where things are so challenged, you know, provide resources, provide support, make sure that people know that they're not alone, especially in a crisis situation like today, I think is fundamentally, you know, important to any company. And I feel proud that we can consistently do that. So, you know, as you said, we have contributed to, you know, the Out and Equal fund for some time. We've contributed 5 consecutive years, about $500,000. So it's something that we're incredibly proud of, because we know that money goes to a good use, and it shows our partnership and our belief. And, you know, we feel very strongly that we'll continue this relationship, and that we'll continue to support those that need to be treated equally. So, you know, I couldn't be prouder to work for a company that feels so strongly about that.
That's wonderful. That's absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much. Now, Sam, you, alongside with your team at the Trevor Project, work to protect the rights of LGBTI youth here in the United States. Given your background, can you give us a brief understanding of the implications of COVID-19 on LGBTI youth and the work that the Trevor Project is currently doing to advance, to protect this vulnerable population?
Thank you, London. I really appreciate that. It's a great conversation, because I'm hearing kind of alignment with everything that has been said before, right? Like all of these challenges that we're hearing from Roy and Chris and Victor are compounded when you're a kid, right? When you don't have the ability to make some of these decisions for yourself. So the Trevor Project has never been taking more calls than we are taking right now. We at one point were double our normal capacity. I have been working basically at this point about 19 hours a day at some point, trying to keep this lifeline, because we're just overloaded in terms of calls and texts and chats, and there's a lot of pain out there. I'm really glad we're there to answer the call. That's the important part, right? Like, so I say all of this with the sense of, it's a good thing that LGBTQ youth know that they have someone that they can reach out to. So let's talk a little bit about some of the things that we're hearing. I obviously will not give specific names because we keep things very anonymous, but I want to provide, since I think this is a good conversation for it, and I hope it will be helpful to everyone, some examples from the calls and texts and chats that we have been getting, so that people can know what youth are saying in their own voice. The first is this direct problem of what we are calling physical distancing. Although the term of art is social distancing, we keep trying to remind folks that it is not actually social distancing, it is physical distancing, and you should be socially as close to each other as you possibly can, especially in a time of crisis. So the problem of physical distancing is that it decreases positive social interactions. So let's say that you were had just come out in college, and we're getting this call a lot, right? You've come out in college, and now you're returning home. That can be a decrease in the positive social interactions that you were getting from your local GSA or your system of care and support. That is leading to severe increases in anxiety and depression. We are recognizing that, especially for our gender diverse youth, right? Like the affirmations that they were receiving, not receiving those anymore can be quite devastating. It's important for us to remember then, as Trevor Project and otherwise, that the most important things we can be doing are on our social media and through our conversations socially, just being openly affirmative, right? Bringing the affirmation to those who need it, rather than we all are seeing the news, right? Like, believe me, it's not every day, it's another day of like, can the news get any worse? And it does somehow every day. But the affirmations that I can post, right? The ways of me saying that I'm not there in your living room with you, but with this post, I hope you know that I still see you. I still think that you deserve to have the happiness that you had and will have again, right? That kind of affirmation is really, really important. There's a special also note that I want to point out of social interactions when it comes to schools. For many LGBTQ youth, they are not out at home, and they're also maybe not out at school. We actually, according to our national survey of the Trevor Project, 34,000 LGBTQ youth, the largest survey of LGBTQ youth out there, only half were out to a single person at their school. But that half found it an extremely positive system where if you're out to that one person at school, you are 40% less likely to attempt suicide as if you were not. So again, these protective factors have been removed. And we also, I'll end, I guess, with this really important factor that I bring up when I come to UN conversations a lot, and I really hope we take to heart. Youth are now trapped at home with the potentiality of conversion therapy. I myself am a survivor of conversion therapy. We are getting weekly calls of youth in conversion therapy, receiving conversion therapy, about to be put into conversion therapy, because they are, again, it is legal in most of the country and especially around the world. So what are we doing about it? The Trevor Project leads the nation's largest and the world's largest campaign working to end conversion therapy. We are adamantly going out with education to churches, to families about the true harms of conversion therapy. Those who've gone through conversion therapy, like myself, are at least twice as likely to attempt suicide, according to our national survey, and nearly 60% of trans and non-binary youth who've gone through conversion therapy will attempt suicide this year alone. So what is one of the things that COVID is bringing up? It is bringing up the idea that the politics, the choice politics of LGBTQ identities are being highlighted and trapped in homes where there is no escape. We also, through our survey, found 25% of the LGBTQ youth that are interacting with us are experiencing housing instability. As it was earlier mentioned, 40% of those experiencing housing instability are LGBT. That's a problem where we are either going to be homeless or placed into a conversion therapy session, right? That is a problem. And I think that it's something that I look forward to working obviously with the other panelists on as well, but it's where Trevor Project can shine. We are hearing the calls every day. We are there to answer. You ended your question with how are we responding? We're there, right? 24/7, 365. I will make sure to put down in the chat all of our contact information. And we have reports out that we'll happily send over to Victor and Chris and others of specifically the issues that LGBTQ youth are saying they're having when it comes to COVID. So we have reports on this because they're telling us what they're hearing. And I think the most important part for us to remember is we have to listen, right? Mm-hmm. Many people are telling us that it's really, really bad. And we have to listen to those who are hurting. And one of those who are hurting are the LGBTQ youth in our lives.
Absolutely, absolutely. My next question for you is, the Trevor Project has a resource known as Trevor Space. It's an online tool for LGBTI identifying youth from around the world to connect, which I think is absolutely amazing. How has this platform been used as a safe space for folks during COVID-19?
Oh, the best question. Thank you, London. I really appreciate that. And to those listening and watching, talk about when technology helps. So Trevor Space, I like to describe it in a cute words as think of it like MySpace or Facebook, but we don't sell your data to the hackers, right? Like it's a pretty great system where it's hundreds of thousands of LGBTQ young people from across the globe. So no matter where you are, you can sign on to trevorspace.org as an ally or an LGBTQ individual and have conversations about what it's like. We have whole clubs that are starting about what's it like to have that little bit of LGBTQ identity in your room. What is one thing you can put up in your room to remind you that you are okay the way you are? We have thousands of paintings and drawings and pictures that people are sharing with each other. It's the best part of social media, right? It's because it's tailored to not crisis, but support. It's the best forms of support for a community that's needing it. So yes, what is it doing? It's growing by leaps and bounds. Literally thousands and thousands of LGBTQ youth are joining every single week. We are trying to get through it as much as possible. It's a safe space. So we have to review each individual as they come through. And it's been one of my favorite activities. It's like, I will happily stay up till 2 or 3 in the morning, making sure that you all have the opportunity, if you are, watching this, to interact with those who understand what you're going through and want to be there to support you. So Trevor Space is, it's been brought up in conversations before with the United Nations. It is safe, secure, and again, there for the youth who aren't necessarily in crisis. To be very clear, I'll just make sure to point this out, right? It is not a crisis intervention. If it's a crisis intervention, call us. If you're a millennial like me who can't stand to talk on the phone, or you're zoomed out with all these Zoom calls, use text or chat. You never have to talk to another human ever again. Don't worry. Texting is totally okay in this world. Text us, chat with us. But if you want to have a conversation in a safe social media space, Trevor Space is there to kind of make sure that we're there and available and listening. What I ended with before, let's remember to listen. The best place to listen can be an online safe space.
Incredible, incredible. Thank you so much, Sam. Now, I have a question that is for everyone. So I'd like everyone to take a minute to answer this question. Undoubtedly, the COVID-19 pandemic is a human rights issue across the board. So what perspective can you share on why we have to tackle this health crisis through a human rights lens? And then I want to also add, how can allies be more of a support to the community through this pandemic and just in general? And Victor, I'd like to start with you.
Thank you, London. What we learn from a human rights-based approach, when we talk about such an approach, is basically what have we learned in relation to how the rules put in place for these situations of emergency, urgency, can ensure that they are going to be used not only to address the urgency, but also to build sustainable solutions and to maintain as much as possible the fabric of society. And what we talk about when we talk about a human rights-based approach, I would describe it in 4 elements. First of all, measures need to be applied in respect to non-discrimination and frameworks of equality. And of course, in order to understand that, you need to understand what measures will be either discriminatory at the beginning or have discriminatory impacts. I think that the examples that were provided by my colleagues in the panel were very, very powerful of how people are feeling in their everyday lives the impact in ways that relate to their identity. And so understanding what non-discrimination means in those aspects is part of the task. The second one is empowerment. You need to ensure that communities, populations, and persons that are affected by the measures will be able to actually be empowered in the process of adoption, follow-up, and mechanisms of evaluation. You need to have participation. That's the third element. You need to listen to communities and learn from them about what works and what doesn't work, what is adequate and what is not adequate. And finally, you need to have the element of accountability. At some point, we will need to evaluate all of these measures and understand which ones of them were really conducive to the protection of public health, which ones may have been using public health as an excuse for other motives, and which ones actually should have been adopted after diligent study of the consequences that they were going to have. That is what a human rights-based framework is, and it's been proven time and time again. We haven't dealt with a pandemic, but we've dealt with a lot of states of exception, emergency, urgency around the world, and we know that these are the elements that actually will ensure sustainable responses that ensure everyone's human rights.
Thank you, Victor. Thank you so much. Chris.
Sure. Well, idea of basic human rights predicates, everything that UNHCR does dealing with displaced people. UNHCR recognizes and daily affirms the fact that LGBTI people are people and are entitled to exactly the same human rights and access to those rights as all people in the world, with no exception and no discrimination whatsoever on the basis of their sexual orientation, gender identification, gender expression, nothing of the kind. So that notion of human rights is absolutely central to what UNHCR is all about, what we do around the world. Now, it is important, and particularly, I suppose, in the current COVID-19 context, that governments around the world understand that any kind of discrimination cannot be tolerated vis-a-vis LGBTI people, and that they are entitled to all these rights as is any other person. Now, what's interesting now is we're getting into a territory where rights that people have long taken for granted and assumed are baked into our daily life are also being tested now around the world in many ways. And the public health emergency has created circumstances, as other panelists have pointed out, that none of us has faced before. And so we are seeing actors, both governments and others, using the COVID-19 public health measures that indeed may very well be required to impose restrictions and to prevent people, LGBTI people in particular, but others as well, other very vulnerable groups, from exercising their rights and from being treated like all other people are treated. So my colleagues and our organization is working intensively right now around the world. And part of what we're doing is continuing to advocate with decision makers, with policymakers, and with civil society and other stakeholders interested in this topic for the notion that, yes, that we are looking at a public health emergency at the moment, but we cannot lose sight of fundamental human rights. And LGBTI people are entitled to exercising those rights on the same basis as any other person.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Chris. And Roy, same question for you.
Yes, I mean, being a retailer, one of the things that clearly is important to us as people, we rely on people to shop within our business. We have our teams that we have to take care of. And, the human rights are just kind of fundamental, and it's a global requirement and need. And I think we have to recognize that, and we recognize that certainly as a company. It's interesting though, because one of the things that we've also realized is this need to be interconnected has probably elevated more than ever. We've seen people connecting in ways that they hadn't connected in a long time. I'm connecting with people that I haven't spoken with in a long time. And I think it gives us an opportunity to make sure that we're elevating the need for these human rights, and we're consistently keeping that top of mind. And, we all know that crisis becomes a multiplier, especially with the LGBTQ community. I think it's more critical than ever that we recognize that people have even more needs today. And these needs come in a magnitude of different ways. We continue to look for ways to be able to bring things to people that are in need, be it our water, our water plant where we're stewarding water, stewardship of water, making sure that, we can provide clean water to people, we can provide drinking water to people. But for me, I guess, if nothing else, in this terrible crisis, I'm really hopeful. I think we all are hopeful that human rights become more apparent and become more top of mind to people. As Chris said, I think they're being challenged in ways that we've never seen them challenged before. And I think this gives us all an opportunity to make sure that those aren't forgotten.
Thank you very much. And Sam, same question to you.
Sure. Wow. It's hard to add to that spectacularness of my previous panelists, but I'll break it down into three sections, and I'll only say a sentence for each or two. So first off, we have to call out the bad. Idaho in the middle of a pandemic, passed legislation limiting trans youth from being able to play sports. We filed an amicus brief this week, taking them to court saying you cannot use a pandemic to pass evil legislation limiting the one thing that could be a beneficial protective factor of non-discrimination in something like an extracurricular like sports. So one, call out the bad. Two, celebrate the good. I think I have probably never gotten to see as many of my favorite Broadway stars perform in my living room as during this pandemic. So I remind myself that has been amazing, right? We are watching multiple people talk about their sexual orientation and gender identity, talk about their creativity, and do these wonderful things in neighborhoods that never would have had access to these conversations. So let's celebrate when that access is shared widely and freely, and keep that up when that is done. And last but not least, I think I'll end with this, which is we have to know what we don't know. The biggest problem I have with COVID, and I am writing an op-ed right now for some big newspapers, is we do not know how many LGBTQ people have gotten COVID, will die of COVID. We do not track deaths based on sexual orientation or gender identity. We at the Trevor Project have a whole campaign working to make sure that we actually know how many people are dying of suicide or homicide, right? But that is not something we collect as a nation. And when we have conversation around disparity, let's remember that disparity requires data. And so although this is a hard time, and not a time that we may want to be thinking about the hard numbers, this nerd really wants some numbers. I will never be able to give us the best response to the next pandemic if I don't know how this actually impacts us with some idea of numbers. So I would say those are my three pieces. Hold them accountable and keep up the fight. Celebrate the good with the things that have come in, and get the data when you can, and ask for it when it's not given to you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sam. Thank you so much. I'm going to turn it back over to Victor.
Thank you, London. I want to add something to that fantastic point made by Sam in relation to knowing what we don't know and continuing to gather data. Now, the spectacular work that is being done in this country to actually integrate LGBT and gender diverse dimensions into the data gathering, that is something that needs to happen worldwide. But imagine how difficult it is to gather data and understand LGBTI lives in the 70 countries that criminalize same-sex relations or forms of gender identity. How are you going to understand the way that people live in their homes, how many people are in the workforce, the relationship of people with the health sector, when you are basically asking them to self-incriminate if you were to gather data about their self-identification as lesbian or gay or trans or bisexual? It's a huge challenge. Remember that those 70 countries represent at this day over 2 billion people in the world living in criminalized environments. 10 of those countries actually punished with the death penalty. So not only in relation to COVID-19, the point that was brilliantly made by Sam, which is that 10 years from now, we will not know in relation to those 2 billion people what the numbers were in relation to LGBT persons. And even in the countries that do not criminalize, pervasive stigma and discrimination is going to make it very difficult in many countries to actually ensure that people will trust public authorities with their data, and to ensure that it's not something that is used to persecute them. The integration of data gathering and management in a responsible, ethical manner, in frameworks that guarantee the respect of the rights of LGBT persons, and that ensure that changes from one administration to the next are not going to be detrimental to the people that gave their data in one administration that was supportive of their rights, but then go to an administration that is against their rights. Again, important, fundamental for LGBT lives in general, and of course, in relation to COVID-19, as we move onto the reality that this pandemic may very well be repeated in the future. We will need to learn, and that learning is going to be made very difficult by not being able to gather data.
Thank you so much, Victor. Thank you. It has been really a great privilege to moderate this panel. And at this time, I'm going to turn it over to D'Anthony for questions from participants today.
Hi, so this is just a reminder that if you're on your laptop, you should have the raise your hand feature at the bottom of your screen. So just select that if you want to be unmuted to speak. And if you're on your phone, you can dial *9, which will raise your hand for you. And then I will unmute you to speak. So our first question that we got in our chat box is from Emily for all participants. How representative are Black, Brown, immigrant, trans, bi folks in your policymaking, outreach, and research initiatives?
I can speak to that. Within Gap Inc., we believe, again, that everybody has got a point of view. Everybody's got a unique place within our environment. And, we very much embrace, equality and differences in people, regardless of who they are. We actually have a group that we pulled together that represents a very diverse, spectrum of people, be them trans, be them women, be them people of color, that we use to help influence decisions as it relates to serving our customers, be it through product, be it through just the service lens, and making sure that we don't stay in this kind of myopic, small point of view that's it's easy for most people to fall into. So, we very much believe in that. We don't think that you can be successful if you don't open the aperture and you don't listen and see a world through other people's eyes, even if it may be quite different than your own. And so I think it's a critical part of any company's success. And I think it's, frankly, what will be part of our world's success if we can open that up.
I couldn't agree more, Roy. I think it's about making sure that diversity of thought creates diversity of solutions. That's a pretty common thought, but it's also about making sure that the voices which are heard recognize their different challenges, right? I think that's been one of our major points at the Trevor Project, was we recognized we were getting more calls and more contacts from trans and non-binary youth. So we need to make sure that we recognize that it's not actually an equal pandemic, right? This isn't actually a pandemic that we can scientifically prove is actually impacting trans and non-binary youth. So we need to listen to what resources do they need as soon as possible and start providing those faster than other resources that we all need everything, right? We all are in trouble, but it's how do we center our work into those who are being most hard hit. I think the question also asked about bi plus individuals, right? As a plurisexual myself, a person who has multiple sexual orientation spaces, I think it's really important to say that it's not about one size fits all. It's not going to be just a person who is maybe in an opposite sex or same sex relationship, because families are complicated. They come in a lot of different ways. And so if we're only trying to solve one problem, we're gonna miss the mark. So I think that was a really good point, Roy, that it has to be, a variety of ideas. And I'll add that making sure I try to listen to those who are hurting the most, recognizing that I will not be able to solve all of those problems, but that if I solve some of those problems, it will help the most as well. Those who are hurting can help the most as well.
D'Anthony, before you move on, thank you so much, Sam. Before you move on to the next question, Victor wanted to add a point.
I think to the question, and I very much appreciate and would like to build on what Roy and Sam have said. I always begin and conduct my processes constantly having one question in mind, which is, who is not in the room? Who is not in the room? Because there are identities as varied as the wonderful diversity of humankind is. And in every context, we need to come in without preconceptions about how people identify and live. Please bear in mind, in relation, for example, to the global perspective, that there are vast regions in the world in which people do not identify with an acronym of LGBT. They will identify with different identities, different ways of living. I think Chris's work is a wonderful intersectionality because people might identify themselves as refugees or asylum seekers or people on the move or at different places and moments in their life. So the question is always, who am I leaving out and how can I do my best to bring those persons in? And I think when one asks oneself honestly that question, it's a good recipe for knowing that you're going the right way.
Thank you. So it looks like our next question is from Rick. How can we prepare for potential attacks on LGBTI rights during the period of reducing physical distancing?
Okay, I'll start. Sorry, everybody. I was giving the space for others, but I think the first part is to be aware and watching. I think the way to prepare is to not be off our guard. I think a lot of people thought that, and it's true, like again, to celebrate the good, a lot of awful anti-trans legislation was stopped. Thankfully, it stopped because state legislatures stopped meeting. So all of a sudden, I was a little bit less busy fighting off the bad. But that doesn't mean that they can't come back. And so it's awareness, it's recognition that our identities, although not up for debate, are literally being debated before the Supreme Court of the United States right now, right? Like any day now, a decision about discrimination could come down, which will impact the lives of many. And I recognize that this needs to be in an international context as well. Those decisions are not happening in a vacuum, right? So how we prepare emotionally for those attacks is knowing that they could come and that they will come. I've been called Pollyanna many times in my life, and I'm okay with that. I'm happy to be the cheerful butterfly in a room, but I am a butterfly who knows that there are people out there who want to get us, and that's okay. Know that they're there, be prepared for response, and don't make statements that make it sound like that when this pandemic is over, so will the persecution. The persecution does not end.
Thank you, Sam. Chris, we'd love to hear from you.
Yes, hi, thanks. I wanted to pick up on a couple of very important points that have been made, particularly by Sam and Victor, by all of the panelists, and hopefully in the process answer the question at hand as well a little bit. But I think, first of all, I really appreciate the distinction that Sam drew, linguistic distinction between social distancing and physical distancing, because they're not the same thing. And on the contrary, at a time when physical distance between people is the order of the day, it's almost more important than ever before, as I think Sam said, to remain social, remain engaged. And in that context, what I would like to say is that part of the work that UNHCR is doing, both in the current consultations taking place on LGBTI forced displacement and in the COVID context, but also more generally, is focusing on information. And it is so important. Information is a form of, and a powerful form of, assistance in itself. And the question is how to reach those people who need that information, who are in general, and now in the current context even more so, excluded disproportionately from access to services, from basic rights, from possibilities of communicating, situations that can at times make those individuals and their needs more difficult than before to identify and to address. So information and communication is absolutely vital. And in that regard, one of the things that my organization is working on in this context, and working with partners and working with others, is establishing, creating, updating, refining, and making sure we always have viable channels and relevant channels of communication that are trusted, that are secure, that are confidential, through which we and partners can share very timely and actionable information both in terms of what the external circumstances are for LGBTI displaced people at the moment, what their options are, and in response to this question, what we anticipate, or what are the scenarios that may be evolving now, and what are some options they can exercise to prepare for those kinds of scenarios. So my point simply being that, yes, information, communication, now more than ever is vital in addressing the needs of LGBTI displaced people, of all people, in the COVID-19 context.
Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you very much. We're going to end the question and answer period for now. I want to turn it over to Marco for additional information.
Thank you, everyone, for such a great conversation. I think I personally learned a lot, and I'm really blown away by a lot of the perspectives that we heard from all of you. So really grateful for everyone's participation and engagement on this discussion. I want to take this opportunity to really rally everyone that's on the call today to obviously support LGBTI rights in your own community, but to send that message to Capitol Hill as well. We're approaching International Day Against Homophobia, Transphobia, and Biphobia. And still today, there is a lot left to be done in terms of achieving equality, especially in vulnerable countries around the world. So if you can take a moment to text the word LGBTI to the number 738674, that petition can be sent to your members of Congress to support the UN's work on promoting LGBTI rights and to promote the UN Free and Equal campaign. I also just want to take this opportunity to thank everyone for being on today's call and for participating in our Global Engagement online series. As you all know, this is a great opportunity for us to talk about and to take action for the UN's work. And so we're really grateful for everyone's participation. And we hope that you will consider joining our movement. If you're not part of UNA USA already, you can do so by texting membership to 738674 to become a member of UNA USA. And we also invite you to join our next Global Engagement online session, which will focus on the value of UN peacekeeping, specifically women on the front lines of peace and prevention. The date will be May 27th. The time is still to be determined, but please keep an eye on your email because we will be sending details regarding this. And of course, any details related to UNA USA will be sent to your email as well, as long as you opted in to receive updates. But on that note, thanks again for participating. Thanks again to our wonderful panelists. Thank you, London, for moderating this great discussion. Please stay safe out there, and we hope to see you all again soon. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. Thank you, London.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.